Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Mariah Mason, and I am an outreach specialist with the Indiana Department of Natural Resources. And we are here tonight to talk all about catfish and one of the catfish monitoring projects that we have going on right now. Before we jump right into hearing from our content experts, which is not me, so you guys are welcome for that, we will hear from two people who are very deeply involved with the research that's going on right now. But I wanted to explain a couple of housekeeping things before we took off. So this event is being recorded. Excuse me. We cannot see you or hear you as the audience members, so you can interact with us through the question and answer feature, which you should see on your toolbar that looks like a couple of little chat bubbles with a Q&A. So please use that throughout the event to throw in any questions that you might have. And then after we hear from both of our presenters who are going to go through some information and data with us all, we will answer as many of the questions as we can from the audience. And then any questions we don't get to during the Q&A portion of the event tonight, we will follow up on those after the event with all registrants in a post-event email. We will also share different resources and links in that email, so keep an eye out for that. But for the duration of this event, we won't be able to see you or hear you, so please use the chat so we can or the Q&A so we can communicate. In case anybody is interested in this, we do have Teams Live does have a closed caption, an auto-generated closed caption feature. So you should be able to turn that on in settings if you would like to do that. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to our first presenter. Our presenters tonight are Phil Kacmar. He is the Big Rivers Fisheries Biologist with the Indiana DNR, and he's going to be presenting first. And when he's finished, Dan Roth from the Centers for Fisheries and Aquatic Science at Eastern Illinois University will be taking over. So Phil, go ahead and take it away.
Oh, yes. Thank you for that introduction. My name is Philip Kacmar. I am the Big Rivers Fisheries Biologist for the state of Indiana. And me and my assistant, Rachel Evans, we have the unique opportunity to be part of the Big Rivers Work Unit, where we are surveying some of the nicest places in the state of Indiana. Now, what exactly does the Big Rivers Unit do? Well, we manage, research, and observe the fish populations on Indiana's big rivers. The big rivers in Indiana are deemed as the Ohio, Wabash, Patoka, and the White Rivers and part of their forks, with our research unit focused mostly on the commercial sections of the big rivers. We do projects above the commercial fishing reaches from time to time. However, the main focus of our unit is in the commercially fished regions, as you can see on the map. Now, it is no surprise that our unit is the one that administers all the commercial fishing activity in the state of Indiana. We make sure that the inland, Ohio River, and Roth fishermen are reporting correctly. They are setting the appropriate nets, and that they have the appropriate licenses throughout the state. And we work hand in hand with law enforcement as well as other entities in order to make sure that they are doing their job legally and correctly. Now, that's part of our office paperwork duties. When we're having fun on our surveys, we are, when we are not in the office, we are on our surveys. We are for that, we are monitoring the shovelnose population to make sure that there are enough fish and that their population is healthy enough for the current level of harvest. If we notice something going on, we can always change regulations to make it more restrictive in the future. Another fish species that the Big Rivers Unit is focused in on is paddlefish. So paddlefish are a highly migratory species, and they require interstate management in order to adequately manage populations. So MICRA, the Mississippi Interstate Cooperative Resource Association, is a collaboration between all the states in the Mississippi watershed and their fisheries managers, researchers, and fish chiefs. And they kind of guide management within those states. When I say guide management, they're not the ones doing the final say, but they usually help with setting up research projects and stuff like that. So then the managers can make better decisions in their states. And another one of these interstate groups that we work with is the Ohio River Fish Management Team, which is a subsection of MICRA. And currently, we have a sauger project going on with them. We changed regulations back in 2020, and we are currently seeing if those regulation changes did improve the size structure of sauger on the Ohio River, as well as change the number within the population of sauger on the Ohio River. Now, another thing that we are involved in that we do not lead is the invasive carp program. So Indiana has its own invasive carp program. However, us and them work hand in hand because they are in the big rivers. So what's good for the carp program is good for the big rivers program and vice versa. So we're constantly helping each other out throughout the year, especially since we are in the same office. So we are always constantly run down the hall trying to make sure that we have enough people for sampling. And with that being said, though, we're all here for the catfish, let's be honest here. So in 2015, we had a change in regulations and we added a trophy limit for catfish on the upper reach, on the upper end of their size, with a 1/over regulation. It's 35 for flats and blues inches and 28 for channel catfish. And in 2015, we decided to consistently monitor our catfish populations. We would monitor them previously before that. However, it was kind of sporadic. There was no real sampling plan. But like I said, in 2015, we started designing one, but it's really started in 2016 where we're doing our sampling plan that we are doing currently. So the Indiana DNR between 2015, 16, and last year, in June and July, we sample 4 locations on either the White River in the odd number years or the Wabash River in the even number years. We do 2 1-mile stretches at each location where we set 20 hoop nets at each location, 10 per site, and we do 1 hour of electrofishing at each site, so 2 hours per location. We do 30 minutes of low pulse, which is more of a catfish setting, and 30 minutes of a high pulse, which we still catch catfish during the high pulse setting, but it is more of a community setting. So that we can have stuff to compare to that we have done previously on the rivers as well as in the future on the rivers. However, in 2023, we decided we are going to try to sample blue catfish in our inland rivers the same way we sample them on the Ohio River via trout lines. So trout lines are one long line with many baited hooks on it, and they are anchored on both sides. And as you can see, that you can kind of see in the diagram. We do add some floats, that's what the red things are, as well as a weight, which is what the gray thing is at the bottom. And that adds a little bit of variation to the depth in case the catfish are feeding higher in the water column, so that then if they're feeding higher, we have them by the floats, so they're not on bottom, but if they're also feeding on the bottom, we just are trying to get all depth ranges instead of only just on the bottom fish. So what we do is we decided to do 10 trout lines at each location, which is 5 trout lines for each mile. We bait them with silver carp, which are very abundant, easy to catch, and also a good thing to get rid of. And we only do 1-night sets, which I will explain in 2 slides why we only do 1-night sets. Now, the reason why we added trout lines is to try to catch more blue catfish. It seems like trout lines catch more blue catfish and hoop nets catch more flathead catfish. Trout lines are cheaper. They're only about $20 or $38 per trout line, and that includes a trout line holder, where hoop nets are over $250. That's just what they were the last time we bought them, and that was in 2022. So I assume that has went up since then. Trout lines can arguably cover more area, where hoop net gets put into one spot, and you try to find the best spot you can to put it in. Trout lines cover basically a good chunk of the river from bank to bank if it's a small enough river. And also, trout lines eliminates ghost fishing. So a hoop net, when it is deployed, if it is not recovered, it can be ghost fishing for indefinitely until the net either deteriorates, gets hit by a tree and collapses it, or the net just collapses in general. And that could be, a week, it could be years. Where trout lines, if we lose one of our trout lines, it's baited with only 25 hooks. So in theory, you could only have up to 25 fish that would be unrecovered. Also, trout lines are easy to fix compared to hoop nets. In my opinion, I like tying hooks and mending trout lines a lot better than hoop nets, because hoop nets require a lot of mending. Mice like to get in them during the winter, and you have to tar them every so often, or else the nets tend to disintegrate because they're constantly in the water. So the reason why we do, so to back up 2 slides, the reason why we do 2-night trout line sets is because when we tried to do only 1 night, when we tried this in one of our locations, the first night we caught 17 blues and 11 channel catfish. So we caught a decent number of blue catfish, but the second night we caught 0 blue catfish and we caught 13 channels catfish. And all the channel catfish that we caught, the majority of them were under 16 inches, so they were not the channel catfish we were targeting, or that I should say that anglers are really targeting consistently. Whereas we are trying to target blue catfish, so we decided that it was not worth our time and effort to do the 2-night trout line set like we do on the Ohio River for blue catfish. So in our standard monitoring, when we do hoop netting, you can see kind of the variation in how many blue cats we catch per year. So in 2023, we only caught 16 blue cats in our hoop net survey. We do catch some in our electrofishing, but it's even more sporadic than our hoop netting. So it's hard to say that with any consistency that they are there based on our electrofishing. However, when we add in the trout line data that we had from 2023, we got over 100 blue catfish that year. That is the largest sample of blue catfish on the White River that we have had in a single year, that is known about in Indiana's history. So it is great that we were able to do that. So that equated to 1.7 blue catfish per trout line, 0.2 blue catfish per hoop net. And the interesting part is when it came to our hoop nets, over a dozen of them came from one single hoop net, and that's the hoop net that's pictured there. So like I said, it's fishing, it's sporadic, it's very boom or bust when it comes to blue catfish in hoop nets. So like I said, we caught 87 blue catfish that year. We caught 50-some channel catfish, a couple flatheads, and some other species. What are some of the other species we caught, you might ask? Well, mostly gar and one very hungry black buffalo. And so we now know the numbers, but what about the size of these fish? So based on catches from 2023, it looks like we caught the same size range of fish, whether that was in our hoop nets or trot lines. However, we just caught significantly more fish in our trot line sample than in our hoop net sample. So we did that in 2023. So what do we do in 2024? Well, we went to the Wabash River in 2024. And when we sampled with our standard sampling, we struck out. The Indiana DNR did not catch one blue catfish in our hoop nets in 2024. Now, Mr. Roth will show some slides in his presentation where blue catfish were caught. Unfortunately, none of those were Indiana DNR hoop nets that caught the catfish in his presentation. However, when we include our trot line data that we caught 21 blue catfish, which equated to 1.1 blue catfish per line. Now, you might be asking, 21 catfish, 1 catfish per line. I thought you guys were doing 4 locations, not only 2. Unfortunately, we were only to do 2 locations last year due to staffing and water levels. We just couldn't get to 2 of the sites, unfortunately. However, we still got some data, which is better than no data when it comes to trout lining. So, and like I said, we got 21 blue catfish. We got 31 channel catfish, and we got a couple flathead catfish overall with our trout lines. And when it comes to the size range of the catfish that we got last year, the lighter colored green is what we've caught in the White River total when it comes to all of our sampling, since we did not catch any in 2024. And the darker green is what we caught on trot lines last year. And as you can see, we did catch a good spread of catfish on our trot lines. We didn't catch any of the big trophy catfish, unfortunately, but we did catch a couple catfish that were nearing trophy size. So I feel confident that if we had gotten to the 2 other locations and gotten more fish, we would see a distribution more like what we see on the overall numbers, not just the trout line numbers. And we did all that because historically blue catfish have been very hard to sample. So we just wanted to make sure that that we weren't missing blue catfish in what we consider our standard surveys, which we kind of showed that we have been throughout the years. Now, what else is going on? So this is the reason why this presentation was put together. Is we have a catfish sampling expansion that we are doing with Ball State and Eastern University on the Wabash and White Rivers. I'll let Dan explain a lot more in depth in his presentation about what we are doing. But so Ball State and Eastern Illinois are essentially expanding what we've been able to do in the Indiana DNR. And in 2025, this year, we also have a White River Creel going on. So if you see one of our Creel clerks at any of our boat ramps, please talk to them. Tell them what you caught fish-wise, because we do not know what anglers are harvesting or catching unless they talk to us. So we have someone stationed at 9 of the boat. We have people roving at 9 of the boat ramps, picked randomly. So if you see either of them, like I said, say hi, give us your trip information if you can. And with that, I just wanted to say that thank you for stopping in. If you have any questions, you can take a picture and message me or give me a phone call. And with that, I am done with my portion of the presentation, and I'll let Dan take away from here.
Thanks so much, Phil. We will go ahead and get things transitioned over to Dan's presentation. If everybody would bear with us for just a second here.
Okay, yeah. Thanks, Phil, for that part of your presentation. We're really excited about this new research we're doing. Like Phil said, it's kind of an expanded version of the past sampling that Indiana's done on the large rivers, particularly targeting catfish. So I'll just jump right into it. So first, I want to acknowledge everyone that's helped out with this research. Obviously, the Indiana Department of Natural Resources is funding this research. Phil has been really great to work with, as well as his supervisor, Rod Edgell. Ball State University is our major partner in this research. So we're kind of splitting up the field and lab work. So Dr. Mark Pyron is the leader over there, as well as his graduate student, Max Stafford, who helped us out in the field quite a bit last year. And then my biggest thanks really goes out to the EIU Center for Fisheries and Aquatic Sciences, where I work as the head researcher and lab manager. So this was really a lot of work to accomplish, both in the field and in the lab, and just wouldn't be possible without our great group of graduate students and undergraduates. So probably the biggest reason why we're all here today is because catfish are extremely valuable, a very valuable group of fish. So both recreationally and commercially. Get my laser pointer. But the 3 species I'll be talking about today are the blue catfish, somewhat at least, channel catfish, and flathead catfish. I talked about them being very valuable. A report by Indiana in 2011 actually found them as the most targeted riverine fish group in southern Indiana rivers. So really important when it comes to fishing. Also on the commercial side of things, they have immense commercial value. I have some data from the Illinois DNR that found that they were 29% of the annual harvest by commercial fishers in Illinois. And then within Indiana specifically, they are commercially harvested in the Wabash, White, Patoka, and Ohio rivers. So on the flip side of the commercial value, they are also very recreationally valuable. Another Indiana report found them as the top 3 targeted group in Indiana. And when we think about recreational fisheries, there's kind of 2 different groups that have different motivations. People that are more interested in recreational harvest, so they don't really care too much about the size of the fish, just as long as it's legal size. And they're more oriented in taking fish home to feed their family. On the other side of things, we have trophy catfishing, which is obviously a really popular sport, where we have these large tournaments going out to catch the biggest fish possible, which are released after weigh-ins. So a little bit about the regulation history. I broke this down into before 2015 and after 2015. So before 2015, both Illinois and Indiana had differing regulations on these fish. So on the commercial side of things, Illinois had a 15-inch minimum length, while Indiana had a 10-inch minimum length. Recreationally, Illinois had no minimum length, while Indiana had a 10-inch minimum again. So since this is a interjurisdictional fishery along the border reach of the Wabash, for example, both states thought that it would be important to apply congruent or the same management strategies for the major catfish species. So they applied a 13-inch minimum length limit with 1 trophy fish per day allowed. And those trophy sizes would be channel catfish greater than 28 inches and blue and flathead catfish above 35 inches. So here at EIU, we've done quite a bit of research on catfish populations, particularly in the Wabash River, to try to give managers a better sense of what the population status is like and to be able to apply effective management strategies. So my advisor, Dr. Colombo here, actually did his dissertation on channel catfish demographics in different reaches of the Wabash River. And he found that there were different important demographic differences among management reaches. So these reaches being areas where they're not commercially fished, areas where they're fished only by Indiana, and then areas where they're fished by both states. Specifically, he found lower abundance of large catfish in commercially fished reaches that coincided with healthier or better body condition, so heavier fish for a given size. So this is kind of a typical pattern we see when you have lower abundance or density of catfish in a certain area. It often coincides with higher body condition. One of our other past graduate students, Zach Mitchell, in 2016, followed up with another similar study, but he incorporated all 3 species that I'm talking about today, and he found species-specific responses to current minimum length limits. So some of the specifics on that, so he found that channel catfish current regulations are pretty sustainable with that new 2015 regulation, but he recommended a higher minimum length limit for flathead catfish. Then later on, my predecessor in my role, Cassie Moody Carpenter, in 2017 published a paper that also recommended a higher minimum length limit for flathead catfish and found that flatheads in the Wabash River border reach were actually experiencing some growth overfishing. So growth overfishing is fish are actually harvested at a size before they're able to reach their maximum growth potential. And this actually leads to a decline in the overall potential yield of that fishery. So yeah, there have been some concerning trends in flatheads in the past. Most recently, our graduate student Valerie Thompson did another thesis involving channel catfish and the border reach of the Wabash. And she found overall regulations are pretty sustainable for that population. So our overall objective with this new expanded research project is to determine the population characteristics of catfish in Indiana's rivers. So I broke it down by three main questions, at least with this first year of data. So first we want to answer, how many are there? So we want to look at some metrics of abundance in different areas of the river. How big are they? So we want to look at their size structure, see how that compares among species as well as those management reaches. And then finally, how heavy are they, or how plump are they? So body condition kind of tells us the fatness of a fish, which really tells whether it's in good health. Poor condition means that there may be limited prey resources, over competition, things like that. So those are the three main questions we wanted to look at today. So to answer those questions, we used a few different field sampling methods. The first being boat electrofishing. We used a combination of the standard frequency that Phil mentioned and the low frequency with 60 minutes of effort per site. And then for hoop netting, the Indiana DNR surveys, which I'll present a portion of their data, used 1.5-inch mesh and 10 nets per site. Our surveys, along with BSU, used a combination of 3 mesh sizes, 9 nets per site. And these nets were all, at least the EIU survey nets, were baited with Zote soap, which has been shown to increase the effectiveness for channel catfish particularly. So those are the two methods we use to kind of count how many fish we're looking at and track trends of abundance through time. And then to get at those other questions, so fish size, fish weight, we measured the total length of each fish, the weight of each fish. We collected a pectoral spine for aging. This is a nice non-lethal way of aging catfish. And we later take a small section of that spine, put it under the microscope, and you're actually able to age the fish just like you would counting the rings of a tree. So you're able to count these annuli, as we call them, or a period of growth for each year, and estimate the age of a fish. Finally, each catfish collected was tagged with an external Floy tag. These tags have a ID number as well as my office phone number on them, and it allows us to not only track how many fish we recapture in future surveys, but as anglers capture these fish, they can report those fish as harvested. And we usually send a little thank you letter and a drink koozie as a small reward for reporting that information. So if you do collect any of our or capture any of our fish during your fishing adventures, then yeah, please give me a call. So in terms of data analysis, to answer how many, we use a metric called catch per unit effort, or CPUE, and it's just number of fish divided by the amount of effort that you expended. So for hoop nets, that's fish per net night. Electrofishing, that's fish per hour. To tell how big they are, I'll use proportional length histograms and proportional size structure, which I'll explain in more detail here shortly. And then how heavy or how plump are they? We use a metric called relative weight. So I don't want to get too far into the details on relative weight, but a target value of 100 is considered good or a healthy fish. So as an example, I included a picture of a large, very rotund channel catfish here. So that fish likely has a relative weight greater than 100. And on the flip side of things, much skinnier fish here, maybe a relative weight less than 100, and could indicate, limited prey resources, things like overcompetition, and so forth. So here overall is our study area. So we ranged from Lafayette in the north on the Wabash to its confluence with the Ohio. These stars are just some of the major cities along the Wabash. And then the White River as well. We sampled the West Fork and East Fork River, on down to its confluence with the Wabash in Mount Carmel. So zooming in on the Wabash, we had three different management reaches that we worked in. So the first being the non-commercial reach. We had one sampling location above US 231 there in Lafayette. The reach that's fished by Indiana commercial fishers only here, we had 5 sites, so ranging from Lafayette to Terre Haute. And then the reach that can be commercially fished by Indiana and Illinois fishers, we had 6 sites, so ranging from Darwin here to Grayville on the border there. Now zooming in on the White River, we had 2 sites in the non-commercial zone and 3 sites in the Indiana commercial zone. Obviously, the White River can only be fished by license holders from Indiana, so we did not have that border reach similar to the Wabash. So like I said, an immense amount of effort went into this. Here's the effort totals. I won't get too far into them just for sake of time, but the majority of effort was put in the Wabash River. And then total catch for 2024. I know these kind of are basic, boring tables, but there are a few things to point out here that are noteworthy. For electrofishing, we caught 580 total catfish. The majority of those being 298 flatheads in the Wabash. So, and then moving on to hoop nets, we had 642 total catfish collected, the majority being channel catfish in the Wabash, with also some significant numbers in the East Fork and West Fork white. So overall, electrofishing was a little bit more effective for flathead catfish, while hoop netting was a little bit more effective for channel catfish. And then the last thing that's worth pointing out is blue catfish are relatively low among both gear types. So that's why I was glad that Phil was able to present some of the trot lining data, because I think it fills in some of the knowledge gaps that we have surrounding blue catfish. So jumping into that first objective, how many catfish are there, or how abundant are they? So here we have our electrofishing catch per unit effort on some graphs, or CPUE. So the CPUE levels are on the y-axis here, and year on the x-axis. The Wabash River is in this left side plot, the White River on the right. So these symbols here are the actual values that we found, but these dotted lines represent the pattern or the slope of those relationships. So what we can see in the Wabash, channel catfish are relatively stable. These are pretty flat lines. So abundance of channel catfish in the Wabash has been pretty consistent since starting this survey back in 2016. And then the White River, pretty similar story. So we have slight decline, but relatively horizontal line here, showing that abundance of channel catfish has been pretty consistent. And then in our most recent year, we had a little higher abundance of channel catfish in the Indiana only reach versus the border reach. And then comparing that to the white, we actually had higher abundance in the commercially fished reach versus the non-commercially fished reach. Now moving to flathead catfish. So this is our electrofishing CPUE. So the same style of graph here. And we're actually seeing a slight increase in flathead catfish abundance in the Wabash River through time, and relatively flat in the White River through time. But I think it is important that we look at this electrofishing CPUE, but I think it only tells us part of the story about flathead catfish abundance. So I also wanted to look at hoop net CPUE for flathead catfish, and it's a much different story here. Now we see significant declines in abundance, both in the Wabash and the White River. Hoop nets are somewhat selective on the size of fish that they capture. So this, first looking at this abundance, it kind of hints at that maybe certain sizes of flathead catfish are becoming less abundant in both of these rivers. In 2024, now that we have these 3 different reaches that we're sampling, flathead catfish were actually more abundant in the border reach versus the Indiana only reach, and then lowest in the non-commercially fished reach, but they're pretty similar values. And that could also be an effect of varying habitat availability and composition as you move down the Wabash. You know, it's a much different river in its upper reaches versus its lower reaches. So the border reach may have a little bit better habitat for flathead catfish as well. So we saw these important differences in the abundance of catfish. So next we got to look at their size structure. So how big are they? So here are the proportional size histograms that I brought up. On these axes here, it's the actual proportion of fish in a given length category. Our length categories here are on the x-axis in total length in millimeters. We have our non-commercially fished reach of the Wabash here, the Indiana only reach, and the border reach. Here we have the non-commercially fished reach of the White River and the Indiana only reach. And since we all don't think in millimeters in this country, I thought I'd at least put up the minimum length limit as these dashed lines here. So there's the 13-inch minimum for channel catfish, and then the 28-inch 1 fish per day limit. And the biggest thing I want to point out here is that the majority of our fish fall within the harvestable size range, so 13 to 28 inches. And that's similar across all the reaches of the Wabash River, as well as the non-commercial and commercial zone of the White River. So that's good news. You know, we have a pretty solid size structure of channel catfish. We did collect some trophy size fish in the reach from Terre Haute to Lafayette, but overall they're relatively rare. And so large channel catfish is something we would like to see more of in our data set. Now moving to flathead catfish. So again, this is 2024 data, both of our gears combined. Same style of graphs here. Putting up our 13-inch minimum length limit here, and then the 35-inch 1 fish per day limit for flatheads. We see a much different story. So we now see that the majority of our fish are actually below the 13-inch minimum length limit, especially when you look at the graphs for the White River. We're really seeing a sheer drop-off of abundance of fish above that 13-inch minimum length limit. And this is pretty concerning to us. I do want to emphasize that this is, you know, year 1 of our expanded study, but this data to us appears like potential stockpiling of flathead catfish below the minimum length limit. So stockpiling is when you have a minimum length limit like this, fish are actually harvested from the population as soon as they hit that vulnerable size range of greater than 13 inches. And the abundance actually piles up below that minimum length. So this is something is concerning, but we do want to collect further years of data to see that if it continues. Again, it's a little less so in the Wabash River, but still a drop off in that harvestable size range. We did have some fish that reached the trophy size in the border reach of the Wabash, as well as both reaches of the White River, but relatively low numbers of trophy size fish again. So with these differences in size structure that we observed, we wanted to look at proportional size structure. So proportional size structure basically transforms the size structure that you just saw into a percentage basis. So it's calculated as number of fish greater than or equal to length X divided by a number of fish greater than or equal to the stock length times 100. These are the actual values that go into calculating it. So for stock size, it's 11 inches for channel catfish, 13 inches for flathead catfish. Quality size, which I will present some PSSQ, or proportional size structure of quality size fish. That would be 16 inches and 20 inches. And then trophy size fish, I said as the 1 fish per day limit of 28 and 35. So to look at what proportional size structure looks like, We have proportional size structure of quality fish in this left graph and trophy fish on the right. So for channel catfish quality size, it's been pretty high across all of our sampling years. So basically this is showing that 70 to say 90% of legal size fish are also quality size fish. So that's promising. However, if you look at the abundance of trophy channel catfish, it's relatively low with this line here at the bottom. So it's ranged from 0 to 1%, depending on the sampling year. So trophy sized channel catfish are pretty rare. Now looking at flathead catfish, we see a little bit more variation in the quality size abundance and an overall negative relationship. So this is showing that quality size flathead catfish are becoming less abundant in the population. And then looking at the pattern of trophy size fish, we again see a negative relationship. So some years, trophy abundance was 13% of harvestable size fish, and now we're looking closer to 5%. So somewhat concerning trend there. And I actually do remember I used to work for Indiana DNR, and I remember being out there and seeing a lot more trophy size fish and quality size fish. And now we just don't see them quite as often in our surveys. So finally, we wanted to look at body condition. So overall, condition is pretty high. So ranging from, at least on the border and Indiana only reach, ranging from about 90 to well above 100. So this is good. Channel catfish condition is high among both of our reaches. Somewhat lower in the non-commercially fished reach. So again, you know, with higher abundance, often you have lower condition because there's a little more competition in the population. Channel catfish in the White River, again, pretty good looking values here, ranging from about 95 to 125. So we really don't see any problems with condition of channel catfish in either of our rivers here. Now looking at flathead catfish condition. So we do see a little bit more fluctuation in their relative weight values over time. But again, pretty good range here. So, you know, ranging from 90 to well above 100 in the Wabash River, the non-commercially fished reach being the lowest condition. Again, so that's a consistent pattern we've been seeing. And then in the White River, pretty much all the values are above 100. So we're, you know, it seems like over competition or prey resources are not really an issue right now. And all the fish are in great health. So to summarize everything, in terms of CPE or abundance, how many fish there are, we found channel catfish are relatively stable through time. You know, well, I'll get to the size structure next, but we saw flathead catfish are, in terms of electrofishing, you know, we've seen relatively stable levels of abundance or slight increases. But when we look at hoop nets, we see a steep decline in both rivers. So that's somewhat concerning for us. We, you know, really used to capture a lot more in our hoop nets. So the size structure of or the abundance of flathead catfish seems to be declining. In terms of size structure, most channel catfish are in that harvestable size range. So that's great news. Great news for anglers, more fish to catch. But in terms of flathead catfish, we did observe that potential stockpiling issue, especially in the White River. So it seems like the effective harvest actually may be stronger in the White River versus the Wabash River, which makes sense. You know, it's a smaller, more isolated river. So heavy fishing pressure could be affecting that smaller area more heavily. And then looking at proportional size structure, channel catfish was overall good. However, we would like to see more trophy channel catfish. That might be something that we address as we collect more data. But we see that significant decline in trophy flathead fish abundance. So, yeah, that's really what jumped out to us the most, and something that we'd like to address with future data collection and potential modification of future regulations. But we really want to protect those flathead catfish from growth overfishing. So we'll be working with Phil and his team to identify any potential changes that need to be made. But first, we need to collect a couple more years of data to see if that growth overfishing or stockpiling issue that we saw continues. Condition is generally high for both species, so no problems there, and we're happy to see that. Next, so just potential mechanisms, because everyone, we see these results, but we want to know why these things may be occurring. So competition could be a factor. Like I said, when you have more dense population of channel catfish, for example, they compete with each other, which leads to lower condition of the average fish. So that could be playing a role. Harvest, again, we think could be involved in some of the concerning results around flathead catfish. And so they may benefit from an increased minimum length limit. But we would like to collect more data to identify that. But along with these things like competition and harvest, other factors may be at play as well. So we all are familiar with invasive carp and other invasive species, but invasive carp in particular, they've been abundant in the Wabash River since the early 2000s, and they actually have the potential to significantly alter the food web. So they're actually planktivores, and they can decrease both the abundance of zooplankton and the species composition in an area where the carp are abundant. So this actually leads to less food for any baby fish that also relies on plankton in their early life. So there's been plenty of other studies that have found negative impacts of invasive species on sport fish. And actually, some data that we have from our long-term electrofishing project on the Wabash has shown that many different species are declining in the Wabash River. And we kind of have the working hypothesis that invasive carp could be involved in those declines. But we really do need to collect more population data to identify, is this just a 1-year result, or are these trends kind of reflective of what's happening in the population over multiple years? So the next steps in our study are to finish the 2024 aging data. So that'll give us the age structure, growth rates, and mortality to put together growth models like you see here. This is actually from flathead catfish in the Wabash in 2012. But this basically gives us things like the maximum potential length of a fish, growth rates that we can compare among different species and different areas of the river to see, is there an issue with growth and what are the reasons? Mortality is particularly important when looking at fishing pressure, because we break it down into natural mortality, just fish that naturally die, and then fishing mortality, which is a measure of how many fish are being harvested each year. We have 2 additional sampling years, like I said, which will allow us a multiple year comparison. And then finally, we really need to collect more data in our non-commercial zones. We were only able to get to 1 site in the non-commercial reach of the Wabash River, but we'd like to expand that in the next couple years. So this presentation will be available later on. So if you want to look up any of my references, you can Google these papers here. And if you have any questions, we'll be ready for them now. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dan. I really appreciate it. My computer is freezing up just a little bit here, so please bear with me while I try to get our screen to change. There we go. Technical issues are always fun. All right, so we do have a few questions here for Phil and Dan. I did want to point out that I went ahead and dropped some of the resources and references that Dan had mentioned during his discussion in the chat if you'd like to look any of those references up. And then that email that we'll send out within the next few days will have a list of extra resources and answers to questions. So that'll be good for everybody. But the questions that we have so far, and feel free if anybody's been holding on to them to pop those in the chat now. But the questions, the questions that we have so far, I think Phil would probably be best to take this first one. Though if I'm wrong, please let me know and I'll shift over to Dan. Is how much commercial harvest of catfish does the Wabash currently support? Can you speak to that, Dan?
Sorry. So yeah, so for the Wabash River in 2023, there was an estimated 9,574 pounds of catfish that were reported harvest based on commercial fishermen. Overall, between the White, Wabash, and Patoka rivers, about 20,000 pounds of catfish were reported harvested from commercial fishermen. And the vast, about, like I said, about half of it was the Wabash. In the White River, we had almost the other half, and then there was about 4,000 pounds in the Patoka River that were reported. So that's kind of what the harvest was in 2023. We don't have the full numbers for 2024 quite yet analyzed.
Got it. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And either of you could probably answer this question, but I'll go ahead and shift over to Dan. Are trot lines set parallel or perpendicular to the current, or does that matter? Can you tell us a little bit about that technique?
I think Phil might be the best on this one. I know the basic answer, but I'll let you go,
Thanks.
Phil.
I'll shift over to Phil here.
Nope. Okay, yes. So we set them parallel or perpendicular to the shoreline. Basically trying to cover from bank to bank more or less, if the river's small enough. So that we can cover basically all depth ranges of the river. We try to find the deepest part of the river, and that's where we set the trot lines. And we try to set on the bank that is deepest, so we make sure we get the depth, since a lot of places are shallow on the river, especially during the summer months.
Got it. Thank you. So not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily matter which way the current is going, more the shoreline. So that is super helpful. Thanks, Phil. I think those are the only questions that we have so far. Phil or Dan, do either of you have any closing information that you'd like to share or additional info that you'd like to share before we hop off here?
I just wanted to mention, if you can hear me, that we are sharing, I posted our website there, and I believe it's in the chat as well. But this presentation will be available on there, as well as just some other descriptions of our other research projects. So if you want more information on anything about EIU fisheries, you can go there and find it out.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Dan. I appreciate it. Phil, did you have anything else you'd like to touch on?
Sure, yeah. So I would just like to thank Eastern Illinois and Ball State for helping with this research project. Unfortunately, Dr. Pyron could not be here today. I just want to shout him out, since he has been 1/3 of the sampling that has been taking place. So I just wanted to mention him, since he was unable to make it tonight. But yeah, so this is going to be a 3-year study. We have 2 more years of the study to do, and we will see what the results are at the end, and hopefully have a really good handle on the catfish populations within Indiana.
Excellent. Well, thank you both so much for your time and your expertise this evening. I definitely learned a lot of information about catfish and the projects that are going on right now to help monitor them, and I hope everybody in the audience did as well. Thanks so much to everybody who spent some of their evening with us to learn more about this important topic. And we will be in communication soon with everybody who registered with additional information and follow-up. The recording for this event within the next couple of weeks will go on our YouTube channel, and as Dan mentioned, they will be sharing it. The Eastern Illinois University will also be posting that presentation. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate it, and have a good evening.
Thank you.